an inspiring lineup of speakers today. The first being Kate Hoey, a farmer's daughter from County Antrim. She took an early interest in sport, becoming the Northern Ireland high jump champion and attending the Ulster College of Physical Education. She graduated in economics from the City of London College and was senior lecturer at Kingsway College. And she's worked as an educational advisor for football clubs like Arsenal, Tottenham Hotspur, Queen's Park Rangers, Chelsea and Brentford. And while she's radical and practical in her politics and the cause of her party, she's maintained a sturdy individualism and independence of mind from fashionable groupthink, as a critic of the ban on handguns and an opponent of the ban on fox hunting, an opponent of her government's policy on the Iraq War, foundation hospitals, university tuition and top-up fees, identity cards and detention without trial. She is a staunch supporter of the United Kingdom and advocates that mainland political parties should organise in Northern Ireland. Member of Parliament for Vauxhall since 1989, she served as Minister for Sport from 1999 to 2001. First came to my attention in the Eurosceptic world for her vigorous response to the approval of Corpus Juris, the EU's criminal code of law, by the European Parliament in 1998, when she was a minister at the Home Office. This was the occasion, if you remember, when both Conservative and Labour MEPs voted against the respective policies of their own parties to accept this legal system, which would mightily increase the power of the EU and remove long-established safeguards such as habeas corpus. Private Eye, I think, was the only national paper to carry it in any detail. I recall that the Conservative MEPs who were taxed with this eventually admitted, "Doe, we pressed the wrong button," which shows you the level of democratic scrutiny in the European Parliament. I don't think the Labour MEPs ever did own up even to that. She became chairman of the Countryside Alliance in 2005 and was appointed Commissioner for Grassroots Sports by Boris Johnson. And her passionate advocacy of withdrawal from the EU and a return to the patriotic values of old Labour have earned the respect and affection of the wider independence movement. In a recent article, she asked, "How can any elected MP allow EU law to reign supreme over United Kingdom law on ever wider matters? Our Parliament must have restored to it the right to decide how our country is run." And we look forward to hearing from her, to her encouragement and exhortation in this mighty struggle. Thank you very much, Kate.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Edward. And it's just been a privilege to follow on from Lord Stoddart, who is one of those great parliamentarians who I think we all owe a huge amount to in this movement in particular, but in the Labour movement, and the fact that he was, I think the word would be put in, almost driven out of the Labour movement by sticking to his principles, says more about the Labour movement than it does about Lord Stoddart. And I'm very, very pleased that he's here. And also to see Eric Deacon, of course, another of my colleagues. It's nice to come to a meeting where there is an ex-Labour MP present, in fact, as well. I'm sorry I've lost my voice a bit. I've been doing a lot of speaking and it suddenly caught up with me last night. But it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm feeling a little bit wary because I know that most of you here have been involved for a very, very long time in the struggle to get our country independent again. And I particularly want to pay tribute to all of those in the Campaign for Independent Britain, because you have been the people who, throughout all these years, have been seen as being in the wilderness. You know, you've been out there continuing to struggle, and with not a lot of interest taken by the media, not a lot of interest taken by the political parties. And it would have been very easy to have given up over the years. But what you haven't done is you haven't given up, and now you are going to hopefully be in the very front of those celebrating when we get our Independence Day on June the 23rd and vote to leave the European Union. So congratulations to all of you over those years who have done so much. I have always been, I voted against as a very young, quite young person, and my first vote practically was to vote to not go into the common market. I'm not sure that I really understood it, particularly when I voted not to go into the common market. But I certainly know that those who did vote to go in thought they were voting for something very, very different from what has turned out. And I know from my own farming background and my parents who actually did vote to go in to the common market. And my mother now is still alive at 94, and I'm just so hoping that she will get that really brilliant news on June the 24th, because she is so articulate about what they thought they were voting for, why they voted for it, and how it is now completely gone away from anything that was envisaged back in 1975. And of course the Labour Party, and Lord Stoddart and Eric will know this very well, the Labour Party was very divided then, but actually the majority of the Labour movement was opposed to staying in the common market as it was. And that just like today, the leaders of our party, the leaders of all the parties, came together in that kind of establishment little elite at the top to drive through the vote to stay in, with huge amounts of money that was put into it, both directly and almost indirectly from the EU. And you know, we've had the referendum bill where a lot of time was spent in Parliament about how we would make sure that it would be a free and fair referendum, because the one thing that MPs said, I think from probably all sides then, was that if we're going to have a referendum, then we need the British public to think and believe that it is actually going to be free and fair. And I absolutely agree with Lord Stoddart. The way things are going at the moment, we are not seeing a free and fair referendum. It's not just the £9.1 million and that extra leaflets that have gone round to the general public, paid for by us, but it's the fact that even on the websites of all the government propaganda, there is links to the propaganda pro-EU. And we're having this battle over whether that will be taken down for the last purdah period of the last month. And the government is resisting that. And we've seen the institutionalized bias of the media. You know, I don't think the BBC or other media outlets actually set out to be biased. I think they are trying to be as fair as possible. But, you know, if you've had years and years and years of a kind of attitude within the BBC that anyone who thought that there was something wrong with the European Union and expressed views about it was somehow, even then, was not just when John Major has called us, but even then was seen as some kind of, perhaps not an extremist, but odd. Anyone who said those sort of things was a bit odd. And you've got the kind of institutionalized attitude that has grown up within the BBC journalists who find it quite difficult now to accept that what they have to say are perfectly reasonable people. They can't actually say we're all odd or we're all extremists. And they're finding it quite difficult to accept that there are now more and more people saying they want to leave. And I think you can hear it sometimes when journalists are actually interviewing people, or the kind of background introduction from journalists, that they find it actually quite difficult to almost accept that this is a rational view. So I do think we have to fight the media as well. Of course, there are some of the media who've been doing a great job over a period of time. I mean, I have to say, it wasn't my regular reading, but I do pay tribute to the Daily Express, who have committed huge amounts of time and space to getting across the argument about the European Union. But I'm trying very much, from a Labour point of view, to always get across to Labour people that there is a left-wing argument as to why we should be leaving the EU. There is a general feeling that it's all about, people who are on the whole supporting leaving would be Conservatives, would be people who would be on the right. And of course we know that there is a very strong left-wing argument as to why the European Union is not good for the workers of this country. We have seen what happened to the Greek people. We have seen the way in which the European Union Commission, apart from the democratic argument, which I'll go into in a moment, simply overrode the wishes of the Greek people. And not only that, but actually did what they could to stop collective bargaining, the trade unions. We've seen that the judgments that have come from the European Union, which have helped to promote the opportunity for the global corporations, for the multinationals, to drive down wages in countries like ours, where people have been able, the court judgments have allowed countries to pay the wages that would be in their country, even though it would be illegal in our country. And there is no way anyone on the left can argue that perhaps the idealism that there was within the Labour Party at one time, that it was only through being part of the European Union that we could get our rights at work improved, that we could stop some of the worst excesses of the Margaret Thatcher government. No one now can say that that idea of social Europe is there anymore. It has been totally destroyed and will continue to be destroyed. And of course the best example of that is, and I think it's something we need to get across to people more and more, and some of the trade unions who are anti-EU have done some very good leaflets on this, the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade Partnership deal, which if it went through, and Obama has said he wants it to go through. Now, he's not going to be around for much longer, and maybe that will change, but there is a driving force behind getting that trade partnership going, which would absolutely, without doubt, be a real attack on our public services, and especially the National Health Service. And what makes me so sad, really, is that up until he became leader, Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, many of the trade union group of Labour MPs would have been saying exactly that and would have been arguing to get out of the EU. And of course now, because Jeremy is leader, I believe his views are still the same, but what he has done, because he wants to keep the party together, and there's a hugely big faction of what I would call progress supporters, they're called, but more to the right within the party, who really do not want to see Jeremy as leader, even though he was elected by a huge majority, and whether you like him or not, or agree with him or not, he got a huge majority in all three sections of our party, and that's democracy, and he is our leader until such time as someone stands against him and he is defeated. But they want to use the EU argument as a wedge against Jeremy, and I think what's happened is that we've seen Jeremy now being, although he always goes on about wanting to see the EU reformed and how awful it is and all these things he'll point out too, but then he goes on to say the logic, which I do not accept, that of course we must stay in and fight to change it. We know, and I think the public know, that that kind of reform is just impossible. We saw, whether he meant it or not, we saw what David Cameron said he was going to get out of the renegotiations. He got virtually nothing. I really do like that leaflet, which I think I held up at one of my rallies, where I said, on the day I think he came back, I said we should all have this kind of leaflet that we can hold up whenever David Cameron is anywhere, saying this is what he achieved, you know, the white piece of paper bringing back from Brussels. And I see now the campaign's produced a little leaflet about that. So we cannot reform the EU. I absolutely agree with, again, what Lord Stoddard said about the trade arrangements. You know, a lot of time, the vast majority of the time on the media has been about the economic situation, about the trade deals, what's going to happen afterwards, you know, what is it going to look like? What does it going to look like when we vote to leave? And I have a very, very simple answer to that. It's going to look like we are a country that is running our own affairs. We will have a British solution a UK solution. We don't need the Norwegian. We can learn a lot from what the Norwegians have done. We can learn a lot from what Switzerland's done. We can learn a lot from Iceland. But we are the United Kingdom. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. Why do we feel so why do our leaders feel so confident in the ability of a dysfunctional European Union instead of actually arguing in a confident way about our own country? They are running our country down. They are unpatriotic. We are the patriots, and we know that, and the British public know that, and we have to keep reminding them of that. I just want to say on the whole democracy bit, Tony Benn called the European Union, I think he used the word, a derogation of our historic democratic right to select and remove our governments. And I think that's a very simple message. And when it comes down to it on June the 23rd, and what I'm finding when I go around and talking to people everywhere, because we will only win this by talking to people. Leaflets are great, and they'll do so much, but the more we can actually engage, the better chance we have of getting those people out to vote. And what I think will happen on June the 23rd, that there will be a lot of people who really maybe haven't been convinced one way or the other on the trading arrangements, on whether they're going to be better off or not so better off, you know, whether we're going to have more people coming in from the EU or not. I think they will be persuaded from a kind of instinctive feel about what they want their country to look like and to be. And that is the question we have to be putting. Do you, whatever anyone else has said, do you want the British Parliament, the MPs, no matter how awful some of them are and how terrible some of the political parties are, do you want your country to be run by people that you can elect and you can kick out? Or do you want your country to be run by the unelected commissioners, usually people who have been failed politicians or retired politicians in their own countries? And it's a very, very simple question. And I think the response of most sensible, common sense people will be that they want to see their country run by British politicians. The uncertainty factor is the other thing that we've got to get across. And again, you know, I mean, Lord Stoddart, in his very short speech, just said it so brilliantly. The uncertainty of staying in is just so much more than the uncertainty of being out. Because it's not uncertain. I think even in ordinary day running of our lives, if we're certain, if we're in control of what we're going to do, that makes us feel much, much better than if we're leaving it to someone else to decide what we're going to do. So for me, the uncertainty of staying in, where we are going to be not in control, where we're going to have 27 at the moment, maybe more relatively soon, other countries who have to be persuaded, and where majority voting counts, we will continue to be outvoted. And that uncertainty of what's going to happen to the Eurozone, what's going to happen on the whole question of Schengen and the open borders, all of that is far, far more worrying and uncertain than the feeling that we are going to get that money back that we're paying in, that we're going to have our politicians in control, and that we are going to be able to do what the vast majority of countries in the world do, which is to be independent countries. You know, we look at, I think it's something like, I've got how many nations there are in the world, 100 and whatever it is. I had it written down. But certainly the thing that comes through is that of the common market, the EU, is the only one of a trading bloc that actually has all that political overtones. America, Canada, Mexico, they wouldn't live with a Mexican foreign minister telling them what to do. They wouldn't live with a court in Canada overruling what the Americans would do. They think of it as a free trade area. And that's what we can do. We can go out there and trade just as easily as if we were not in, if we're not in the EU. I sometimes think maybe I'm just seeing it from a very kind of optimistic point of view. But then you actually look at it in straightforward language, and it's actually common sense. Why would we, as the fifth strongest country, not be able to sell? Politicians don't sell. It's people, it's businesses. And there's absolutely no reason why on June the 24th, when we voted to leave, that trading will not continue. And if we want to make special deals with the European Union, fine. If not, remember, our exports to the European Union are dropping. We're selling much more now to the rest of the world. We're selling there quite happily at the moment. We'll be able to continue that. So the economic argument and the uncertainty argument is something that I totally reject. So ultimately, what can we do to make sure we win? Well, we've got the messages, we've got the leaflets, we've got the people on the ground. And there are a lot of people out there who'll never go on the radio, never go on television, never really get involved other than knowing that they want to get out. And I think there's a lot of people out there who actually want to be asked to do something, who really want to help. And I think the more that we can talk to people, the more we can get on to actually in day-to-day conversation. I say it all the time, but every time, and I did it this morning when I was in the supermarket before I came here, I always talk to people. I simply say, oh, how are you feeling about the vote on June the 23rd? Now, occasionally you get somebody saying, what vote? What are you talking about? And that does worry you a little bit. But on the whole, I actually think more people are engaged in this than they are in normal general elections. I really do feel that people out there, once you get outside London, and how many of you don't live in London? Yeah. You see, everything is very different outside London. London, we cannot, and I think part of the problem of, I won't wash any dirty linen in public, but I think part of the problem of some of the campaigns, perhaps at certain levels, are actually in a Westminster bubble. They're interested in what's happening here. They're interested in the media, immediate reactions. They're interested in the social media, which is important, there's no doubt about it. But they forget that the vast majority of people don't follow the media in the way that we do. They don't follow social media. They don't understand or want to understand the implications of who's up and who's down within the Tory party. They're interested in the issue, and that's what we have to continue to get across. So my message is the turnout is crucial. We have to get our supporters out. Our supporters are committed. Our supporters care. Our supporters are passionate. The Remainers are, every single one of them, every debate I have done with every person who's on the Remain side has more or less started off their speech by saying, well, of course, I don't think the EU is perfect. And then they go into certain things that perhaps they'd like to change. They are not going to be as committed. And I know even from my own party, where the party machine now is pushing round leaflets, is trying to get a lot more happening on the ground. And I was talking to Frank Field, who's supportive of leaving, and what he was saying, that his party in Birkenhead, yes, the General Committee had said they wanted to stay, and then a whole big pile of leaflets came to be delivered about how wonderful the EU was to stay in, and how difficult it was, and how, in fact, up until last week or so, no one had offered to actually put them out. And I think that can give us a little bit of comfort, but it doesn't get round the fact that everybody really has to make this their priority for the next 4.5 weeks or 5. How long is it exactly? How many days?
38.
39 now, 39 days, not very long. But if every single person in this room persuades at least half a dozen people a day to come off saying they're not actually decided yet, and gets them to say that they will be voting to leave, we can do it. And I've found an awful lot of people who are what I call bashful Brexiters, particularly in London. People do not want to admit that they're going to be voting to leave. And I think we can take heart from that. But let's not underestimate what's going to be thrown at us. We are going to... you think there's going to be nothing else could be thrown at us, because they've almost got everybody from a top position in economics and institutions and countries' leaders to say we must stay in. The British public are much, much more sensible, and I believe that the more they throw at us, the more it will build that rebellion and that streak of independence that is so much part of the British character. And I hope that that will happen, and we will be voting to leave on June the 23rd.